They say when you're stuck in an alien zoo, the first thing to go is your dignity. If only that were true. Vespera had plenty of dignity left, and it was annoying the hell out of her fellow captives. "Hey, Ves," grunted Graz, the Gracorian with the complexion of a rotisserie chicken left too long under a heat lamp. "Think you could summon some psychic mojo and get us out here?" Vespera leaned against the translucent wall of their enclosure, her eyes narrowing at the kaleidoscope of alien faces gawking at them from the other side. "Sure, Graz. I'll just whip up some telekinetic magic right after I finish my invisible unicorn collection." Graz snorted, a sound like a rusty hinge on the verge of retirement. Figures. Humans and their invisible friends. The Zorthans, however, were not imaginary. Looming, iridescent creatures that twitched and slithered, they were the less charming cousins of nightmares and seafood platters. They ran the zoo with all the benevolence of a toddler with a magnifying glass and a particular interest in ants. "Ah, our favorite zookeepers," Vespera muttered as a pair of Zorthans scuttled past. Their tentacle-like appendages left a trail of slime that sizzled when it hit the floor. "Wonder what they'd taste like with a side of fries." "Probably like despair," said Quill, the avian historian who spoke in tones as dry as a textbook left in the sun. "And just as chewy." Vespera smirked, though the joke barely skimmed the surface of the siring atmosphere. There was a time when humans were the apex predators, the top dogs, the undisputed champions of eating things they shouldn't. Now, they were the exotic exhibit, the star attraction of the universe's crappiest theme park. "You ever miss Earth, Quill?" Vespera asked, more to pass the time than out of real curiosity. "I miss the weather," Quill replied. "But then again, I also miss getting shot at less." Earth had been a dumpster fire of conflicts and poor decisions, but at least it was their dumpster fire. Here, in the Zorthan Zoo, they were just another species to be gawked at and experimented on. "Look at them," Vespera gestured to the throng of alien visitors. "Probably placing bets on which one of us will snap first." "My money's on Graz," Quill said without hesitation. "He looks about 3 sandwiches short of a picnic." Graz simply grunted, a sound of pure existential resignation. Vespera turned her attention back to their overseers. "So, what's the grand plan today?" Another round of who's got the weirdest superpower. The Zorthans were fascinated by humans, particularly the ones like Vespera who had abilities that defied easy categorization. Of course, fascination in this context meant relentless probing and the occasional zap to the cortex. "All right, folks," Vespera clapped her hands, trying to rouse something resembling morale. "Let's try not to die of boredom before lunch." "Lunch?" Graz perked up. "What do you think we'll get today?" "If we're lucky, something that doesn't still have an argument with life," Quill said, clicking his beak in a manner that suggested he'd given up on the universe long ago. "Knowing our luck, it'll be gelid despair," Vespera replied, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to drown a small planet. Again, the Zorthans, ever punctual, started their daily routine of hauling the captives out for their exercises. It was less about fitness and more about seeing which of their pets could endure the most humiliation before breaking. "Here we go," Vespera sighed, stepping out of the enclosure with all the enthusiasm of a slug facing a salt shaker. Another day in paradise. The exercise yard was a sprawling arena where dirt was a luxury and privacy a myth. Captives from dozens of worlds were herded through their paces, each session a peculiar blend of boot camp and freak show. "Step right up, folks," Vespera called out, her voice echoing across the yard. "Get your front row seats to the greatest show on this miserable rock." The Zorthans watched with their usual detached interest, occasionally prodding with their devices when someone lagged behind or dared show too much spirit. "You'd think they'd at least sell popcorn," Vespera mused aloud. "For all the entertainment we're providing." "You think we'll ever get out here?" Graz asked, trudging alongside her with the grace of a boulder rolling uphill. "Sure," Vespera replied, flashing a grin as sharp as a razor. just as soon as they invent a spaceship that runs on cynicism and broken dreams. Graz chuckled, a sound like gravel in a garbage disposal. Well, we're set for fuel then, aren't we? The session dragged on, each circuit of the yard a reminder of their status as cosmic playthings. Vespera could feel the Zorthan's eyes on her, dissecting her with thoughts sharper than any scalpel. "You ever wonder what they think about while they're watching us?" Quill asked, his voice a low flutter beside her ear. "Probably whether they're getting our good side," Vespera replied, watching as a particularly bored-looking Zorthan tapped its device with a tentacle, "or if the lighting's right for their next research paper." "I'd love to see the publication," Quill said. "Humans, fascinating, ultimately disappointing." "A bestseller," Vespera agreed, sidestepping a muddy puddle that might have once been a hopeful raindrop. The exercise was finally called to a halt, the Zorthans shepherding them back to their enclosures with all the warmth of a tax audit. "Another successful day of achieving absolutely nothing," Vespera announced as they settled back into their cell. "Anyone else feel a sense of accomplishment?" "About as much as a goldfish in a blender," Graz grumbled, flopping down with a resigned thud. Quill perched on a low shelf, his feathers ruffled but his spirit unbroken. "We should really put that on a motivational poster." A comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared suffering, settled over them. "You know," Vespera said, more to herself than anyone else, "I used to think there wasn't anything worse than being bored. Turns out I was wrong." "What could possibly be worse?" Graz queried, eyes half-closed in the universal sign of "leave me alone." "Being interesting," Vespera replied, staring up at the featureless ceiling. "Here, that gets you killed." And interesting she was, even if she didn't like to admit it. It was why the Zorthans kept her around, why they hadn't tossed her into the cosmic garbage heap along with the rest of humanity's would-be saviors. "What do you think they're planning next?" Quill asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who knows?" Vespera said, the corners of her mouth twitching into a grin. "But whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be just as terrible as everything else they've ever done." "Optimism," Quill noted dryly. "A refreshing change." "I aim to please," Vespera replied, settling into the uncomfortable familiarity of the cell. As the artificial lights dimmed, signaling another night in captivity, Vespera allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The Zorthans could keep them locked away, could study and probe and experiment, but they couldn't take everything. Not yet. "Tomorrow's another day," she murmured, closing her eyes. "Same crap, different planet." "Let's hope for less crap," Graz mumbled, already half asleep, the weariness of another wasted day pulling him under. "One can dream," Vespera whispered, letting the darkness wrap around her like a tattered blanket. Yet in the shadows, she felt the stirrings of something more, a defiance that the Zorthans could never quell. They were mere zoo exhibits, yes, but humans had a knack for making the impossible happen, for laughing in the face of overwhelming odds. And if Vespera had anything to say about it, tomorrow might just bring a little less crap and a whole lot more trouble for their captors. The thought warmed something inside her, even as sleep claimed her at last. The next morning, or what passed for morning in a place without sun, started like a caffeinated badger, abrupt, unwelcome, and with claws out. The Zorthans buzzed around the enclosures, their tentacles flicking irritably as they prepared for another day of their version of community service. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and resignation. "Looks like they are eager to poke and prod," Vespera muttered, watching the zookeepers bustle about through the translucent wall of their cell. Their movements were fluid and unnerving, like a set of bagpipes that had just come to life. "When aren't they?" Graz replied, his voice rougher than a boot camp drill sergeant's sandpaper. "It's like they missed the memo that we're not dissecting frogs in high school anymore." Quill clicked his beak thoughtfully. "I suspect they're preparing for another round of let's see if it hurts. I do hope they bring snacks this time. Dying of boredom and starvation seems excessive." The Zorthans had a particular interest in Vespera's seemingly magical abilities. In their eyes, she was less a human and more a puzzle to be solved, like a Rubik's Cube that occasionally bit back. She could move objects with her mind, but only when the planets aligned or when she was particularly pissed off. Today, though, she'd be happy just to move her breakfast into something resembling edible. The cell door shuddered open, releasing a gust of recycled air that smelled faintly of despair and wet socks. "Time for the daily humiliation, I suppose," Vespera said, stepping out and stretching her limbs with all the enthusiasm of a cat being forced into a bath. Graz trailed after her, grumbling under his breath. "Can't wait to see what exciting new trauma they'll inflict today." They were joined by Jackson, a scrawny engineer with a knack for turning junk into slightly more useful junk, and Seraph, a medic whose bedside manner included more sarcasm than sympathy. The pair completed their little band of misfit toys. "Morning, sunshine," Jackson greeted Vespera with a grin that was all teeth and no sincerity. "Ready to dazzle them with your mind tricks?" "Sure, right after I make a sandcastle out of moon dust," Vespera replied. "You got a new plan to turn leftover scraps into a functioning escape pod," he said, patting the assortment of metal bits strapped to his belt. "All I need is a rocket engine, a few tons of fuel, and a miracle." "Well, miracles are on backorder," Seraph interjected, checking the contents of her medkit as if preparing for doomsday. "But I hear wishful thinking is buy one, get one free." "Sounds like a bargain," Vespera quipped as they reached the exercise yard. The Zorthans were setting up a series of shiny, ominous machines that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi horror flick. "Ah, the Meat Grinder 3000, my favorite." The exercise yard was a smorgasbord of the universe's most unfortunate souls, each species weirder and more uncomfortable looking than the last. Vespera couldn't help but wonder if the Zorthans had some kind of contest going. Ugliest alien, most pathetic life form, best in show. Their captors, meanwhile, busied themselves with their toys, tweaking dials and adjusting readings with the kind of focus usually reserved for brain surgeons or toddlers stacking blocks. Soon enough, the captives were herded toward the machines like sheep to a shearing. "Time to get zapped and poked," Quill said dryly, though his feathers fluffed nervously. And not in the fun way. One by one, they were hooked up to the machines, metallic tendrils wrapping around them like unwelcome hugs. Vespera felt the familiar tingle of electricity running through her veins, waking every nerve in her body with its harsh touch. The Zorthans were trying to harness psychic powers, but the only thing they'd managed to harness so far was a profound sense of irritation. Vespera was determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "You know," she said, teeth gritted, "if they put half as much effort into fixing the universe as they do into torturing us, we might actually get somewhere." "You're assuming they care," Jackson replied, his voice strained as he endured his own session under the Zorthans' machines. "For them, this is probably just a day at the zoo." Vespera focused on the faces of her friends, on the small defiant spark that refused to be snuffed out. It was there in Graz's clenched jaw, in the way Quill held his head high, in Jackson's steady hands on the machine's controls, and in Seraph's calm, unwavering gaze. Hope, a fragile, ridiculous thing like a paper airplane in a hurricane, began to flutter in her chest. It was absurd, really, the idea that a bunch of misfits could stand against a galaxy's worth of apathy and cruelty. And yet, the more they pushed, the more she felt something stir within her, like embers waiting for a breath to ignite them. Eventually, the Zorthans tired of their games, releasing them back to their cells with the same disinterest as a gambler tossing away a losing hand. The captives shuffled back, each step heavy with fatigue and lingering pain. Back in their enclosure, Vespera sank to the floor, her back against the cool wall. "Well, that was fun," she said, sarcasm dripping from her words like acid from a leaky pipe. "Tomorrow, we should ask if we can do it blindfolded." "Or on fire," Jackson added, his voice muffled as he inspected the new bruises blossoming on his arms. Graz settled next to her with a grunt. "Zorthans must think we're a set of batteries they can recharge whenever they want. But we're not," Seraph said softly, her fingers tracing lines of invisible strength across her skin. We're more than they know. Vespera nodded, considering the truth in her friend's words. They were more than exhibits, more than playthings. They were inconvenient. And that in itself was a kind of power. So, Quill said, addressing the group with a glance that flickered between hope and humor, any revolutionary ideas for tomorrow, besides throwing a wrench literally into their plans? Jackson asked, tapping the side of his head where ideas seemed to flit around like wayward moths. Got a couple of schemes brewing. And if plans go south? Graz asked, raising an eyebrow. Then we go south too, Seraph replied, her voice cool as ice and just as sharp. But we go together. Together. The words settled over them like a shield, flimsy but strong enough to fend off the worst of the world's cruelties. It wasn't much, but it was something, and in a place like this, something was everything. Vespera let her head fall back against the wall, closing her eyes and letting the sounds of her companions fade into the background, a tapestry of whispers, plans, and promises. The Zorthans could prod and probe all they wanted, could poke at their minds like curious children with a stick, but they couldn't take the things that mattered. Not yet, and not today. Tomorrow, she murmured, her voice barely a breath. We'll be ready. As sleep claimed her once again, Vespera held onto that thought like a lifeline, a tether that tied her to her friends and the fragile, indomitable hope that refused to die. The Zorthans might have had them in chains, but they'd forgotten one crucial thing. Humans had a remarkable talent for breaking them. And Vespera had a feeling, call it instinct, call it psychic foresight, call it whatever, that soon, very soon, the tables would turn. The alien zoo was buzzing with its usual excitement, which is to say, none whatsoever. The Zorthans were all about as enthusiastic as slugs on a sun, which for them was peak bugging people for science mode. They were particularly keen on Vespera today, their telescopic eyes zooming in on her as if expecting fireworks. Instead, they got a yawn. Classic Vespera. Vespera, Graz, Quill, Jackson, and Seraph found themselves once again in the exercise yard, which was really just a euphemism for torture chamber with better ventilation. Today, the Zorthans had rolled out a new contraption that resembled a cross between a dentist's chair and a medieval torture rack. Vespera eyed it with all the enthusiasm of a cat spotting a vacuum cleaner. I'm guessing that thing's not for deep tissue massages, she said dryly, gesturing at the machine. More like deep tissue disintegration, Graz replied with a grunt. They'll probably call it exploratory science. Exploratory my ass, Jackson muttered. It's more like let's see if they scream. Quill, who was always good for a bit of perspective, added, at least we know their creative department is working hard. Probably the only thing around here that does. Seraph smirked as she checked her medkit, ensuring it was stocked with enough bandages and sarcasm to get through another day. Maybe we should start charging them for entertainment. I've seen circus acts with less audience participation. As the Zorthans herded them toward the device, Vespera felt that familiar crackle of defiance sparking in her veins. It was the kind of feeling that made her want to throw a wrench into the works, literally and figuratively. And she wasn't alone. The others were right there with her, their frustration bubbling just beneath the surface, ripe for a little reckless action. The Zorthans began their routine, attaching electrodes and muttering in their blubbery language. Vespera closed her eyes and tried to focus, tapping into that strange energy that had been building inside her like a storm cloud ready to burst. The planets weren't aligning just yet, but anger was always a reliable ignition switch. You know, she said, her voice rising above the alien babble, all this equipment could really use a tune-up. Maybe some new wires, a couple of strategic malfunctions. Jackson, never one to miss a cue, winked at her. I'd be happy to offer my services, free of charge, of course. Just think of it as an unauthorized upgrade. The machine hummed to life, and Vespera felt a familiar pulse of electricity shoot through her. But this time it was different. The charge didn't just sting, it connected. Like finding a stray puzzle piece and realizing it fits the whole picture. As the machine cranked up, Vespera focused on that connection. She imagined the electricity wasn't just coursing through her but flowing from her. The thought alone brought a sly smile to her lips. "All right, boys," she said, her voice dripping with mock confidence. "Let's give them a show." Graz and the others, picking up on her tone, began to subtly play along. Graz clenched his fists, pretending to struggle. Jackson, ever the actor, groaned dramatically as if the machine were wringing him dry. Vespera concentrated, picturing the machine sputtering like a dying engine. And as if in response to her wishful thinking, the machine began to hiccup, its lights flickering ominously. The Zorthans exchanged surprised glances, their tentacled limbs flailing in confusion. "Did we just break their toy?" Quill asked, his beak clicking with delight. "Looks like it," Seraph replied, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Maybe they'll send us the repair bill." Vespera felt the energy swirling around her like a tempest, stronger than before. It wasn't just the planets, wasn't just her anger, it was something shared, something bigger. The realization was almost intoxicating. She leaned back, pretending to be exhausted, but inside she was grinning like a Cheshire cat. "That, my friends, is what we call a little bit of sabotage." The Zorthans, flustered and frustrated, eventually shut down the machine, deciding it was safer to call it a day. They shuffled the humans back to their enclosures, their murmurs a symphony of irritation. Once inside, Vespera sat cross-legged on the floor, her mind whirring with possibilities. "I think we found a new trick," she said, her voice low but charged with excitement. "You mean making their stuff blow up in their faces?" Graz asked, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Because I could get used to that." "It's not just their machines," Vespera replied, leaning in. "It's us. We're getting connected, stronger." Jackson nodded, fingers tapping against his thigh in a rapid staccato. "If we can mess with their equipment, maybe we can mess with their heads too," Quill, ever the philosopher, added, "or at least make them think twice before poking us with sticks." Seraph stretched out her legs, a satisfied look on her face. "I have to say, breaking things is a lot more fun than being broken." Vespera's mind raced with ideas, each more reckless than the last. They were still trapped, still at the mercy of their captors, but for the first time victory didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt possible, tangible. "So what do we do with our new powers?" Graz asked, crossing his arms. "We start small," Vespera said, glancing around the group. "Little acts of defiance. Nothing big enough to get us zapped into oblivion, but enough to show them we're not just their playthings." "And if they catch on?" Seraph asked, eyeing Vespera carefully. "Then we improvise," Vespera replied with a wink. "It's what we do best." As the lights dimmed in the zoo, signaling the end of another day, the group settled down, their spirits buoyed by the audacity of hope. The Zorthans might have been in control, but it was starting to look a lot like the inmates were running the asylum. Vespera lay back, staring up at the ceiling with a grin that just wouldn't quit. She felt the warmth of her companions around her, their collective determination a shield against the night. "Tomorrow," she whispered into the dark, more to herself than anyone else, "we do it again. And this time maybe we'll leave a bigger dent." The others laughed softly, the sound a comfort in the cold, sterile space. They were tired, worn thin by the constant struggle, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were still here, still fighting. "Get some sleep," Graz murmured, his voice like gravel in the shadows. "We're gonna need our strength." "Strength and maybe a miracle," Jackson added, his voice fading as sleep claimed him. "Miracles are overrated," Vespera replied, her eyelids drooping. "What we need is a plan, and maybe some duct tape." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken promises and shared resolve. As sleep wrapped its arms around them, Vespera knew one thing for certain. The Zorthans had underestimated them. They thought they were just exhibits, little more than curiosities in a galactic sideshow. But humans were never content to be mere spectators in their own story. And Vespera, for one, had every intention of rewriting the ending. So with a final, defiant thought, she drifted off into dreams of freedom, each one brighter and more audacious than the last. And in the darkness, hope burned like a star, fierce and unyielding, casting light on a future that was suddenly, tantalizingly possible. The morning in the alien zoo began like any other, with the annoying beep of Zorthan machinery and the lingering odor of whatever passed for breakfast in this particular corner of the galaxy. Vespera lay in her enclosure, staring at the translucent walls that offered all the privacy of a fishbowl, and wondering if today would be the day they finally pushed things too far. "You think they'll bring the rack back out today?" Jackson asked, his voice a grumble as he stretched, bones cracking like the first gunshots of a battle. "Depends," Graz replied, rubbing sleep from his eyes, "on whether they figured out that it was us who broke it. They probably think their machine died of natural causes," Quill quipped, a sardonic edge to his voice. "Old age, perhaps," Vespera chuckled, sitting up and swinging her legs over the side of her cot. "Well, if we do see it again, maybe we can put it out of its misery permanently this time." As they gathered for their daily exercise, the group fell into step, a ragtag bunch of misfits trudging toward the so-called yard. The Zorthans watched them with their usual mix of disdain and vague curiosity, their telescopic eyes following every movement. "Ah, look at that," Seraph muttered. "We've got an audience. Too bad we didn't bring popcorn." It wasn't long before the Zorthans' suspicions began to manifest. The exercise yard, never a place of fun, now featured an ominous array of surveillance equipment that would make even the most paranoid conspiracy theorist feel justified. Cameras whirred and clicked, capturing every twitch, every grimace, every rebellious glance. "Guess we're famous," Graz noted, a smirk playing on his lips. "Wonder if they are selling tickets. Or maybe they're just trying to catch us in the act," Jackson said, eyeing the cameras with a mixture of disdain and defiance. "Let them try," Vespera said, her voice low and filled with a quiet confidence. "We've got an edge they don't know about." The Zorthans, it seemed, were not content to sit idly by as their human exhibits played games of rebellion. Today they had deployed additional guards, if one could call walking blobs with too many eyes and not enough limbs guards. Still, their presence was a reminder that defiance had consequences. Vespera felt the gazes of the Zorthans boring into her, searching for the source of their technical woes. She returned their stare with a look of pure insolence, a silent dare for them to do their worst. "Think they are onto us," Seraph whispered, her eyes scanning the yard for new threats. "Could be," Quill replied, his voice thoughtful. "But then, paranoia is just good thinking in a place like this." As they circulated the yard, the group began to test their newfound powers. Small things at first, a flicker of the lights here, a brief static burst there, nothing overt enough to draw immediate suspicion, just enough to remind themselves it was possible. "Baby steps," Vespera said, her voice a calm undercurrent amid the chaos. "We want them frustrated, not furious." But the Zorthans were not known for their patience. The flickering lights and static bursts were apparently enough to trigger a response. As the humans lined up to return to their enclosures, Vespera noticed the guards huddling together, their movements unusually coordinated. "Oh," Graz muttered, noticing the same thing. "Looks like they've got something planned." As if on cue, the Zorthans began muttering in their blubbery language, gesturing toward the humans with their tentacles. The meaning was clear. The humans would have to be more closely monitored, which meant more restrictions, more surveillance, more invasive probing into their lives. "Great," Jackson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just when I thought the service here couldn't get any worse." The humans were herded back to their enclosures with more care than usual, guards maintaining a tight perimeter as if expecting a breakout at any moment. Once inside, Vespera collapsed onto her cot with a huff, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. "They are on edge," she said, confirming what they all knew. "We've rattled them, but they are not backing down," Quill pointed out. "If anything, they're doubling down." Vespera nodded, her mind racing with the possibilities. "Then we need to be smarter, more coordinated. We can't just rely on chance and luck." The group spent the next few days testing their limits, a delicate dance of defiance and discretion. The Zorthans, oblivious to the true nature of the chaos, increased their vigilance, deploying more cameras and more guards. But the humans, united in their cause, found strength in one another, their bond a shield against the encroaching despair. "Maybe we should start a betting pool," Seraph suggested one evening, her voice thoughtful. "On who's going to have the biggest meltdown first." "My money's on the one with the wobbly eye." "I'll take that bet," Graz replied, a grin in his voice. "I've got 5 on the one that always forgets to turn off his mic." The jokes, the camaraderie, the shared sense of purpose, all of it was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest places they were not alone. Together, they continued to hone their abilities, small victories layering on top of one another like bricks in a wall. Vespera, for her part, focused on channeling her anger, using it as a tool rather than a weapon. She discovered that, when she allowed herself to truly feel, to let the emotions wash over her without fear, she could direct that energy with surprising precision. It was during one of these sessions, her mind alight with potential, that she stumbled upon a realization. "What if we could communicate?" she blurted out, startling the group from its various activities. "Communicate how?" Jackson asked, raising an eyebrow. "Telepathy," Vespera said, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. "If we can manipulate their equipment, maybe we can reach each other too." Without words, the idea was met with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. It was a bold plan, perhaps too bold, but boldness was all they had left. "Okay, Professor X," Graz said with a snort. "How do you propose we get started?" "Practice," Vespera replied, her voice firm. "And trust. We need to trust each other, let go of the barriers." Quill, ever the philosopher, added, "And maybe a little luck wouldn't hurt." The following days were a blur of quiet focus and intense concentration. It was hard work, often frustrating, but the prospect of success was intoxicating. They tried everything: meditation, visualization, even the occasional guided breathing exercise when Graz wasn't looking. And then one day it happened. A sudden flash of insight, a connection that felt as real as the walls around them. It was faint, like a whisper on the edge of hearing, but unmistakably there. "Vespera," Jackson said, his voice a mix of disbelief and excitement. "I heard you." The others crowded around, disbelief giving way to wonder as they began to experiment, sending thoughts back and forth, testing the limits of their newfound ability. "It's like learning a new language," Seraph said, her voice filled with awe. "A language only we can speak." Vespera felt a surge of hope, a lightness that she hadn't felt in years. They were making progress, real progress, and with it came the tantalizing possibility of freedom. But freedom was a dangerous word in the alien zoo, and the Zorthans were not known for their leniency. As the humans developed their abilities, the Zorthans grew increasingly suspicious, their surveillance becoming more intrusive, their punishments more severe. The group knew they were walking a razor's edge, playing a dangerous game with high stakes and little room for error. But they also knew that they had no choice. This was their only chance, and they intended to take it. The days passed in a blur of training and subterfuge, each small victory building upon the last, the tension ratcheting up with each passing moment. The Zorthans, oblivious to the growing storm, continued their attempts to maintain control, unaware that their human captives were on the brink of something extraordinary. Vespera lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling and dreaming of freedom, her thoughts like stars scattered across the vast expanse of her mind. They were close, so close, and she knew that when the moment came they would be ready. But for now she let the darkness wrap around her like a cloak, a silent promise of what was to come. The Zorthans might have them in chains, but those chains were growing weaker by the day. And soon, very soon, it would be their turn to tremble. Vespera didn't know what was worse: the Zorthans' blubbery voices droning on like a broken record, or the fact that she was stuck listening to them without her crew. It's like choosing whether to have your teeth pulled with rusty pliers or a sledgehammer. Either way, you're screwed. She sat in her solitary enclosure, the translucent walls providing just enough visibility to remind her how isolated she was. "This place is like a bad vacation," she muttered to herself. "Except, with more tentacles and fewer margaritas." Isolation was supposed to break her spirit, she knew that much. The Zorthans were all about morale crushing, probably had a manual on it. Chapter 1, Separate the Humans. Chapter 2, Watch them squirm, but Vespera was nothing if not stubborn. "If they think this is gonna break me, they are in for a surprise," she grumbled, though the bravado felt hollow in the echo of her tiny cell. Meanwhile, back in the main enclosure, Graz, Quill, Jackson, and Seraph were huddled together, trying to look like they weren't plotting something. Which, of course, meant they were plotting something. "All right, brainiacs," Graz said, his voice low enough to avoid the ever-watchful cameras. "How do we get Vespera back before they decide she's more useful as goo in a test tube?" Seraph, leaning against the wall with a smirk that could melt steel, shook her head. "We need a distraction, something big, like Quill's ego." Quill rolled his eyes. "Cute. But I was thinking more along the lines of a technical malfunction. We break something important." "Again? Didn't you just fix the last thing you broke?" Jackson asked, scratching his chin. "Details," Quill replied with a dismissive wave. "But seriously, the Zorthans have been edging towards another exploratory science session. If we can mess with their setup, maybe we can create a window to get Vespera out. Plus, I hear their new contraption's a real beauty," Graz chimed in. "Perfect opportunity to see if it's as dent-resistant as they claim." The others nodded, the seed of an idea beginning to sprout. But ideas didn't amount to much unless you had the guts to follow through. And they were all about guts, mostly because the Zorthans hadn't gotten around to scooping theirs out yet. Back in her cell, Vespera was pacing, the monotony of the place grating on her nerves like nails on a chalkboard. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she missed the simple things, like being able to insult Graz in person or watching Jackson try to fix things he inevitably broke worse. Just then, a familiar whisper edged into her mind. It was faint, like trying to catch a radio signal in the middle of a storm, but it was there. "Vespera," it was Quill, his mental voice filled with static but unmistakable. "Can you hear me?" She stopped pacing, focusing on the sound. "Yeah," she thought in response, willing her thoughts to reach him. "Barely. What's the plan?" "We're working on it," Quill replied. "In the meantime, try not to let them poke you with anything sharper than their tongues." "Can't make any promises," she thought back, trying to inject some levity into her words. "But I'll do my best not to be a science experiment just yet." The connection faded, leaving her alone with her thoughts. But even that brief exchange felt like a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't as alone as the Zorthans wanted her to believe. On the other side of the alien zoo, Graz and the crew were hard at work, or at least as close to work as they got in this place. They'd spent the last few nights mapping out the surveillance equipment and finding its blind spots. Turns out, the Zorthans were better at sticking their noses where they didn't belong than actually keeping an eye on things. "Time to give them a little taste of their own medicine," Graz whispered, as he fiddled with the guts of a machine that looked suspiciously like a toaster on steroids. Seraph kept watch, her eyes flicking between the doors and the monitor. If this doesn't work, we're going to have to eat our words." "Yeah, well," Jackson said, "we've all eaten worse." The plan was simple: create a distraction big enough to make the Zorthans rethink their life choices. The kind of thing that would make them scramble around and forget all about little old Vespera in her personal hell. Quill was busy at another terminal, hacking away like it owed him money. "I've managed to loop the cameras for a few minutes. That should give us enough time to cause some chaos." "Chaos is my middle name," said Graz with a grin, sparking a few wires like he was lighting a fuse. In her cell, Vespera felt the energy shift. It was subtle, like the air before a storm, but it was there. She took a deep breath, letting her anger simmer just below the surface. If they were going to make a move, she needed to be ready. She could sense the Zorthan's eyes on her, even more so than usual. They seemed to be waiting for something, as if any moment she might explode into a shower of sparks and profanity. Which, while tempting, wouldn't exactly help right now. She closed her eyes, focusing on the fleeting connection she had with her crew. It was time to test just how far they could push their powers, and how to keep her head from exploding in the process. In the exercise yard, the chaos began. Graz's handiwork was paying off spectacularly. The Zorthans were rushing around, their usually sluggish movements replaced by a frantic energy as lights flickered and alarms blared. "Looks like our friend hit a nerve," Jackson said, eyes bright with excitement. "Now or never," Quill urged, motioning towards one of the larger, stationary machines, the new contraption that was rumored to do all sorts of unpleasant things. With the cameras disabled and the Zorthans distracted, they seized the chance. Graz jammed a metal rod into the heart of the contraption, relishing the satisfying crackle of circuits frying. "That's for all the probing," he muttered, stepping back as the machine sputtered and died. Back in her cell, Vespera felt the shift immediately. The walls around her seemed to hum with a different kind of energy, one she could tap into. It was as though the barriers between thoughts were dissolving and she could feel the presence of her friends, their minds reaching out to hers. "Now, Vespera," Seraph's voice came through, clear and strong. "We're ready." Focusing her mind, Vespera let her emotions swell, anger, hope, defiance, all swirling into a focused point. She imagined the walls of her cell, not as barriers but as gateways waiting to be opened. The Zorthans were too preoccupied with the malfunctioning systems to notice the changes happening around them. As the humans concentrated, a pulse of energy radiated outwards, knocking out the remaining systems and plunging the area into chaos. Vespera felt the walls give way, not physically, but mentally, and she knew she could reach her friends. They were all connected now, a web of thought and willpower, stronger together than the Zorthans could ever understand. The Zorthans finally caught wind of what was happening, but it was too late. Their systems were down, their guards were scrambling, and the humans were no longer the helpless exhibits they'd once been. "Time to go," Quill's voice echoed in Vespera's mind, filled with a mixture of urgency and triumph. "We've got one shot at this." Vespera didn't need to be told twice. She channeled the collective strength of her friends, using their combined power to manipulate the locks on her cell. With a satisfying click, the door swung open, and she stepped out into the chaos of the zoo. The group reunited in the midst of the pandemonium, their connection stronger than ever. The Zorthans, still trying to regain control, were no match for the humans' newfound abilities. "We're not out of the woods yet," Jackson said, glancing at the chaos around them. "But it's a start." Vespera smiled, a genuine smile that had been a long time coming. "Let's make sure they remember the day the zoo animals turned the tables." And with that, they moved as one, a unit bonded by trials and forged in defiance. The Zorthans might have made them captives, but they'd forgotten the one thing that set humans apart, their ability to rise, no matter the odds. They weren't just exhibits anymore. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the universe was about to bear witness to what happened when you underestimated the power of people with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. As they pushed through the chaos, Vespera felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Freedom hung tantalizingly close, not just the physical freedom from their confines, but the freedom to rewrite their destiny. With their minds linked and their resolve unshakable, they were poised on the brink of something extraordinary. "We're not just surviving," she whispered, more to herself than the others. "We're fighting back." The Zorthans had taken much from them, but in trying to crush their spirits, they'd ignited a fire that couldn't be extinguished. And as the humans made their way through the madness, one thing was clear: they would never be confined again. The universe was vast and unforgiving, but with each step they took, they claimed a piece of it for themselves, leaving behind the ghosts of their captivity and embracing the possibilities of the stars. The Zorthans were about as quick on the uptake as a slug in a marathon, which, given the chaos Graz had unleashed, was working in the crew's favor. They stumbled around the zoo like headless chickens, their usual air of superiority replaced by the less than dignified looks of bureaucrats caught in a scandal. Funny thing, Quill mused, sidestepping a frantic Zorthan guard who just slammed face first into a wall. For all their high-tech mumbo-jumbo, they can't handle a good old-fashioned glitch. Jackson grinned, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. Yeah, makes you wonder how they ever managed to conquer space in the first place. Maybe they outsourced the tricky bits to someone who actually knew what they were doing. As the crew navigated the pandemonium, Vespera felt a strange sense of comfort. Even with the alarms blaring and the walls shaking like they were caught in the throes of a cosmic hangover, she was surrounded by her people. Her crew. Her dysfunctional, sarcastic, and stubbornly resilient family. "Hey, Vespera," Graz called, slowing his pace to match hers. He looked like a kid on Christmas morning, all glee and mischief. "How'd it feel to finally break out of that fish tank?" "Like taking a breath after being underwater for too long," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind around them. "Now let's make sure we don't dive back in." Seraph, who'd been quietly observing the chaos with the kind of calm that either bespoke inner tranquility or a broken mind, chimed in. "So, what's the plan? Make a break for it while the Zorthans are busy tripping over their own feet, or do we have something else in mind?" Quill's fingers danced over a handheld device he'd cobbled together from spare parts. "I've got a little surprise cooked up for them. Nothing fancy, just a little software hiccup that should keep them occupied. But we should probably think about an exit strategy." "Exit strategy?" Graz snorted. "We busted out of a high-security alien zoo. The exit strategy is run like hell and don't look back," Jackson smirked. "For once, Graz has a point." "Don't sound so surprised," Graz shot back. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day." Amidst the banter and chaos, Vespera felt the bond between them strengthen. It was more than just camaraderie born of shared misfortune. It was a tangible force that hummed in the air, visible in the way they moved and spoke, in the glint of determination in their eyes. The Zorthans, meanwhile, were still scrambling, their usual expressions of aloof disdain replaced by confusion and irritation. They were clearly unused to this sort of disorder, more accustomed to poking and prodding than dealing with actual resistance. As the humans pushed through the chaos, heading towards what they hoped was freedom, Vespera couldn't help but feel a kind of grim satisfaction. The Zorthans had underestimated them, seen them as mere specimens to be studied and catalogued. But they'd forgotten that humans had a knack for surviving the impossible, turning despair into defiance. "Don't get too cocky," Jackson warned, as if reading her thoughts. "We've still got to get past whatever security measures they've got at the perimeter." Vespera nodded. "Right, one step at a time. But I have a feeling they're too busy putting out fires to worry about a few humans slipping through the cracks." The group pressed on, the sound of their footfalls drowned out by the cacophony of alarms and the panicked chatter of Zorthan guards. They moved with purpose, their movements almost synchronized, each of them instinctively covering the other's blind spots. "Hey, Quill," Seraph said, her voice carrying easily over the din. "When you said you had a surprise, how big a surprise are we talking? Because I'm not really in the mood for fireworks unless they're happening away from us." Quill's grin was positively wicked. "Let's just say, our friends in the control room are about to have the worst day of their lives. The Zorthans might have been advanced in the ways of science and technology, but even they had their limits." And Quill, with his knack for turning the mundane into the catastrophic, had found a way to exploit those limits. He hit a button on his device, and somewhere in the bowels of the zoo, something sparked, then erupted. The lights flickered again, plunging sections of the complex into darkness. The Zorthans' chatter took on a new edge of panic. "We're going to need a distraction if we're going to make it past the main gate," Quill said, still grinning like a man who'd just set fire to the enemy's playbook. "And nothing says distraction like blowing the circuits in the central control hub." "Subtle," Jackson drawled, "but effective." It was a gamble and they all knew it, but it was a calculated gamble, one that played to their strengths. Humans weren't just resilient. They were adaptable, relentless, and more than a little bit crazy when the situation called for it. As they approached the perimeter, the chaos inside the zoo only grew. The Zorthans were completely out of their element, their usual calm replaced by the kind of frantic energy that suggested they were only a few steps away from gnawing on the furniture. "Almost there," Graz muttered, glancing back at the zoo. "The Zorthans didn't see us coming, and now they don't know how to keep us from leaving." That was the beauty of it, really. The Zorthans had built their zoo on the assumption that humans were predictable, manageable. They'd built it on logic and order, never considering that their captives might thrive in chaos. As the crew reached the perimeter, Vespera felt a thrill of exhilaration. For the first time, freedom felt like more than a distant dream. It felt tangible, a promise just waiting to be fulfilled. But they weren't there yet. As they neared the gate, a line of Zorthan guards loomed ahead, their weapons drawn and their faces set in grim determination. The element of surprise had bought the humans time, but not enough to make a clean escape. "Great," Seraph grumbled. "Just when things were going our way." "Don't worry," Graz said, hefting a makeshift club he'd grabbed along the way. "I'm a sucker for a good brawl." As if on cue, Vespera felt that familiar surge of power, the same one that had helped her break free. She focused, drawing on the energy of the group, feeling their thoughts and emotions meld with hers. "We've got this," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Together." The Zorthans might have had the numbers, but they lacked the one thing that made the humans truly dangerous: unity. It wasn't just about strength in numbers. It was about the bond between them, the knowledge that they would fight tooth and nail for each other. With a shared resolve, the crew charged forward, their movements synchronized and precise. They were a force of nature, unstoppable and unyielding, driven by the desire for freedom and the refusal to be caged. The Zorthans, for all their advanced technology and superior numbers, didn't stand a chance. They were overwhelmed by the humans' tenacity, their carefully ordered plans crumbling under the onslaught of a few determined individuals. As the last of the guards fell, the crew paused, taking in the sight of the open gate. Beyond it lay the unknown, a universe of possibilities waiting to be explored. "Well," Jackson said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'd say that's a nice start." Vespera smiled, feeling the weight of their victory settle over her like a cloak. Nice might be a stretch, but it's something. The universe was vast and unforgiving, but they were ready. Ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to forge their own path. As they stepped through the gate, leaving the chaos of the zoo behind, Vespera couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They'd fought their way out of captivity, defied the odds stacked against them, and now they were free. Free to carve out their own destiny, to prove that humans couldn't be contained or controlled. Free to remind the universe that they were more than just exhibits in a zoo. They were survivors, fighters, and most importantly, family. And as they disappeared into the vastness of space, one thing was certain. The Zorthans would never forget the day they learned what it truly meant to underestimate humanity. The moment the crew spilled into the main control room, the Zorthans were still desperately slapping at screens, their blue-green faces etched with varying shades of "what the hell is happening?" The humans had finally managed to weaponize confusion, and the Zorthans were drowning in it like toddlers at a calculus convention. Vespera, eyes shining with a manic glint that could either mean she was about to save the day or set something on fire, or possibly both, took center stage. "All right, team, let's do what we do best, improvise." Graz let out a hoot, already digging his claws into what looked suspiciously like the main power switch. "I love improvising. It's like jazz, but with more explosions." "Focus, Graz," Quill chimed in, jabbing his newly acquired gadget like it owed him money. "And maybe try not to blow us all up yet." "Where's the fun in that?" Graz replied, his grin widening like a messed-up Cheshire cat. Seraph, in her usual calm manner, surveyed the chaos with a detached interest. "The Zorthans are reacting like cats to a laser pointer." If we push the right buttons, they might just implode. Figuratively or literally, Jackson asked, eyebrow cocked. Because I'm not equipped to handle either scenario. Both would be nice, Quill mused, eyes flicking between wires and screens, fingers moving faster than a caffeinated squirt. The Zorthans, bless their overconfident little hearts, had expected their captives to be, well, captive. But the humans had managed to twist their hopelessness into a new kind of weapon. Hope was a strange thing. The more suppressed it was, the stronger and more volatile it became when unleashed. Like cheap soda shaken and uncapped, it was about to explode all over the unsuspecting aliens. As the humans scrambled to put their half-baked plan into action, Vespera felt a familiar warmth surging inside her, that peculiar tingle that came when planets lined up just right, or when she was royally ticked off. And being stuck in a glorified terrarium for weeks on end had certainly provided the latter in abundance. "Everyone ready?" she asked, her voice cutting through the din. "Time to show these Zorthans what humans are made of." Graz cracked his knuckles with an ominous pop. "Blood, sweat, and bad ideas. Let's make him proud." With a nod, Vespera closed her eyes, focusing on that pulsing energy within her. Around her, she could sense the others doing the same, their hopes and frustrations merging into a single, potent force. It was like being at the center of a storm, chaos swirling around them, yet perfectly in sync. Quill was the first to notice the effect. "Whoa, anyone else seeing this?" he murmured, eyes wide as the room seemed to shimmer. The air was thick with something intangible, a power that defied logic and reason. Even the Zorthans, in their mad scramble to regain control, paused, confused expressions growing more pronounced. They were witnessing an anomaly in their neatly ordered universe, something their science hadn't prepared them for. And then it happened. Like a wave crashing down, the humans' combined energy surged outward, an invisible shockwave that sent the Zorthans reeling. Orders forgotten, they stumbled back, hands fluttering helplessly at controls that no longer responded. Jackson let out a low whistle, eyes scanning the room with a look of satisfaction. "Would you look at that? We broke them without even touching them." Graz chuckled, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "I guess hope really is a four-letter word." The Zorthans, caught in a web of confusion and disarray, were pitifully ill-equipped to handle the onslaught. Their sophisticated technology was designed to suppress and contain, not to handle the unpredictability of human spirit. They were ultimately undone by the very thing they'd underestimated, the resilience of their captives. The humans moved swiftly, knowing their window of opportunity was a narrow one. Vespera led the charge, their path clear and free of resistance. Behind them, the Zorthans floundered, their usual calm shattered by the unexpected uprising. As they approached the final barrier, the last vestige of captivity, Vespera paused, turning to face her crew. "This is it," she said, voice steady despite the rapid thrum of adrenaline. "Once we cross this line, there's no going back." Quill nodded, his usual sarcasm tempered by a rare sincerity. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Jackson, ever the pragmatist, added. "And if we fail, at least we'll have given them one hell of a headache." With that, Vespera turned back, determination etched across her face. The final barrier loomed ahead, but they were ready to face whatever lay beyond, ready to take control of their own destiny. Together, they surged forward, a united front against the oppressive force that had held them down for so long. The barrier fell away, crumbling under the weight of their resolve, and they burst through, free at last. The Zorthans, caught in the rippling aftermath of the humans' rebellion, could do little but watch as their carefully curated zoo collapsed around them. Their captives, once mere specimens, had become a force to be reckoned with, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. As they stepped into the unknown, the humans were buoyed by a newfound sense of purpose. They'd survived the impossible, and now they would thrive in the chaos they'd created. Somewhere in the distance, alarms continued to wail, a cacophony of confusion in their wake. But for Vespera and her crew, it was a symphony of freedom, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, hope could shine through. And so they marched on, leaving behind the ruins of their past, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were more than just survivors. They were a family, flawed, irreverent, and bound together by the fires of adversity. As they disappeared into the vastness of space, one thing was certain: the universe would never forget the day the humans broke free. The Zorthans, in their arrogance, had underestimated them, and it had cost them dearly. For Vespera and her crew, it was a new beginning, a chance to forge their own path and prove that humanity couldn't be tamed or contained. They were free, and they would make the most of it, come what may. As the chaos of their escape settled into a comfortable sort of pandemonium, the humans finally got a moment to catch their breath. The Zorthans were still scrambling around like chickens in a fox's den, their control room a war zone of flashing lights and urgent beeps. Apparently, the aliens had never considered the possibility of needing a plan B, which was working out just fine for the humans. Vespera, taking stock of the situation, couldn't help but chuckle. Well, would you look at that? We broke out of an alien zoo, and all it took was a little coordinated insanity. I feel like we should celebrate, maybe with a drink or 12. Graz, who was toying with a Zorthan gadget that looked suspiciously like a water gun, nodded. I'm in. This place is drier than a nun's, he trailed off, catching Seraph's disapproving glare. Well, you get the point. Quill was already tapping away on his handheld device, improvising something new and vaguely illegal. Let's not get too comfy. We've got a whole zoo to dismantle, and it'd be a shame to leave all these other poor sods behind. Right, Jackson agreed, wiping some alien goo off his boot with a grimace. We can't leave them here, that would be bad form. Besides, I'm sure some of these species know how to make a decent cocktail. Vespera rolled her eyes, half amused, half exasperated. Leave it to you guys to prioritize booze over liberation. Seraph, ever the voice of reason, had already started fiddling with the zoo's control systems. If we're going to play intergalactic Good Samaritans, we should do it quickly. The Zorthans might be slow learners, but they'll figure something out eventually. Right. Let's make it rain freedom, Vespera said, her voice resolute. And maybe some chaos while we're at it. The crew scattered like a bunch of mischievous kids in a candy store, each one tackling a different part of the zoo's infrastructure. The plan was simple: open all the enclosures, release the captives, and hope for the best. Graz, with his love of improvisation, managed to rig up a device that sent the enclosure doors sliding open one by one. It's like Christmas morning, but with more tentacles, he quipped as a particularly grumpy-looking creature waddled out. Quill, meanwhile, was working on disabling the surveillance systems, muttering something about making the Zorthans blind as bats. Or whatever the space equivalent is, he added, jabbing at his device like it was responsible for all his life's problems. Jackson had taken on the delightful task of handling the Zorthans, who were still floundering around in a sea of befuddlement. Just keep them busy, folks, he said, shooing a pair of aliens away with a wave of his hand. We've got work to do, and I'd hate for them to interrupt. While the others worked, Vespera took a moment to reflect. Hope, it seemed, was a double-edged sword. It had kept them alive, driven them to fight, and now it was setting them free. But it was also unpredictable, volatile, and capable of causing as much trouble as it solved. Hope's a hell of a drug, she murmured to herself, watching as creatures of all shapes and sizes emerged from their enclosures. Some looked confused, others elated, and a few just plain pissed off. Seraph joined her, a rare smile gracing her usually stoic face. Look at them go. Glorious, isn't it? Vespera nodded, feeling the weight of their victory settle over her. Yeah, we're really doing this. I mean, it might all go to hell, but at least we tried. And trying something, right? Seraph replied, her gaze lingering on a group of particularly excitable aliens who were chasing a Zorthan around in circles. Meanwhile, the Zorthans, bless their bureaucratic hearts, were still trying to make sense of the chaos. Their attempts to regain control were akin to putting out a forest fire with a squirt gun, pathetic, futile, and oddly satisfying to watch. Graz, true to his nature, couldn't resist taunting them. "Hey, Zorthans, you know what they say about assuming, right? It makes an ass out of you and—" He paused deliberately. "Well, just you, actually." Quill snorted, shaking his head in mock disapproval. "Do you have to kick them while they're down?" "Why not?" Graz replied with a shrug. "They'd do the same to us if they weren't so busy tripping over their own feet." As more enclosures opened and more captives joined the fray, it became clear that their plan was working. The zoo was no longer a place of confinement but a cacophony of defiance and freedom, each species bringing its own flavor of rebellion to the mix. The air was alive with the sounds of victory, cheers, roars, and the occasional alien equivalent of a whoop. Somewhere in the distance, alarms wailed, but they were drowned out by the jubilant chaos of the newly liberated. Vespera, taking in the scene, felt a surge of pride. They'd done the impossible, broken the chains that had bound them, and now they were paving the way for others to do the same. "We did it," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "We really did it." "Of course we did," Jackson replied, joining her. "We're humans. We might be a mess, but we're a determined mess." Quill, not one for sentimental moments, clapped his hands together. "All right, people, let's wrap this up. I'd like to get off this rock before the Zorthans start getting ideas." "Good call," Vespera agreed, turning towards the exit. "We've overstayed our welcome anyway." As the crew regrouped, they were joined by a motley assortment of aliens, each one eager to leave the zoo behind and explore the universe beyond. It was a strange, surreal procession, like a parade of the weird and wonderful. Graz looked over the eclectic crowd, his expression one of pure delight. "Look at us. We're a regular intergalactic circus, and just as likely to get run out of town," Jackson added with a smirk. Seraph, ever the realist, was already scanning their surroundings for potential threats. "We should go. The Zorthans might be slow, but they won't stay confused forever." With a nod, Vespera led the way, her crew and their new allies falling in a step behind her. As they marched towards their freedom, she couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. And for the first time in what felt like forever, they were free to explore it. "Here's to new beginnings," Jackson said, raising an imaginary glass. "To freedom," Graz added, his tone more serious than usual. "And to the poor bastards who have to clean up this mess," Quill finished with a grin. They were irreverent, sarcastic, and more than a little rough around the edges, but they were also a force to be reckoned with. Together, they'd taken on the might of the Zorthans and won. Now they were ready to take on whatever the universe had to throw at them. As they stepped out into the unknown, the weight of their past fell away, replaced by the promise of a new future. A future where they weren't just survivors but pioneers, carving out their own path in an unpredictable universe. For Vespera and her crew, the journey was just beginning. They were free, and they intended to make the most of it together. And as they disappeared into the vastness of space, one thing was certain: the universe would never forget the day the humans broke free. The Zorthans had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating their captives, and it was a mistake they wouldn't soon repeat. But for now, the humans were content to let the aliens stew in their confusion. They had bigger fish to fry, new adventures to embark on, and a galaxy full of surprises waiting for them. "Here's to us," Vespera said, her voice carrying a mix of hope and determination. "Let's show the universe what we're made of." And with that they launched into the stars, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They were free, they were together, and they were more than ready for whatever the future held.